I think we can start. My name is Alexander, and I'm happy to see all of you here. And it's a big honor for me to give a final talk here at the SymfonyCon conference in Berlin. And I hope that you are very tired, and we can start with my talk. I want to talk about possible ways to optimize your Symfony application with the help of Varnish reverse cache proxy. Let me introduce myself. I have worked in one of the biggest Forex company in the world called Alpari, and I am head of software architecture in this company. I also have worked with computers since 7 years old and acquired a lot of knowledge and experience with building complex applications, with creating and promoting domain-driven development, clean code principles for enterprise application. If you want to follow me on social network, you can search me by my nickname, Lisachenko. I'm available in Twitter and GitHub. If you know, I'm also the author of Go aspect-oriented framework, which was backported from the Java famous frameworks like AspectJ or Spring. And this framework allows you to use aspect-oriented paradigm for your Symfony or Laravel application to solve complex issues like logging, like caching, like authorization with just only one aspect. Let's move on to my agenda. In my presentation, I want to cover following things. Firstly, we'll have a look at the process of typical Symfony application growing. It's like a baby from a very childhood to a mature state. Secondly, we'll have a look at Varnish and why it's so popular nowadays. And thirdly, we'll look at the possible ways how can we optimize our application and how can we use Varnish with your Symfony application. And finally, I will show you some VCL tricks to easily handle 10,000 requests per second with your application, and I think it's a very interesting experience. If you have any questions about my talk, please leave them until the end, where I will be happy to answer them. Let's imagine our small Symfony application. We begin with our first deploy. Maybe it's very remarkable when we just pushed our application to the production, and finally we can enter our address into the browser, press enter, and maybe we can see some WTFs, hotfixes, anything. It's our first visitor, and we are very happy that our application is working. And we can handle, for example, from 1 to 30 requests per second without any additional improvements. We can bypass all caching technologies. Next remarkable moment when we publish, for example, an article, or maybe we publish a nice link, or maybe start our marketing campaign, and suddenly a lot of visitors arrive to our site. Maybe it's okay, but on some time your application won't be handle such requests. Boom! We have timeouts, we have timeouts from engines of FPM, and we need to make some changes. First change that we can do is to introduce our caching layer. Caching layer allows us to handle more requests by storing some important information about users, about our files, our classes, for example, in opcode cache, or maybe we can store entities in our database. And we can handle much more requests per second. It can be, for example, 200 requests per second. It's okay. And typical Symfony application can handle such requests per second. But if your website is very interesting and you can make a lot of traffic by publishing articles or maybe promoting your site, then we'll notice that all those caching technologies can handle more than 3,000 requests per second. We need to buy more backends because we need to separate the load on each server in order to balance the load between our servers. And we still cannot handle more than 1,000 requests per second. Reason here is very simple. It's Symfony slow, PHP slow, our backend slow. But is it possible to achieve a more hit rate, more requests per second? The answer is, oh, sorry. Is it performance problems that we cannot handle 1,000 requests per second? I think yes, because nowadays speed is a feature. Because when we serve our content faster, we can earn more visitors, we can index our site better, we can attract additional visitors. But the key to success is to eliminate slow PHP request handling, because Symfony is slow, and we can use a reverse proxy cache called Varnish. And what we use here, we can handle more requests per second. Actually, we can handle 10 of thousands requests per second with just single Varnish instance, because we don't hit our backend at all. Moving on to the next part of my talk, it's about the Varnish itself. And before I continue, I want to ask, who uses Varnish? Oh, great. And one more question, who uses Varnish with EdgeSide Includes? Only a few persons. Okay, we can continue. For those who don't know about Varnish, Varnish is a HTTP accelerator designed for storing content for heavily dynamic websites like Facebook, Twitter, Vimeo, Tumblr. But Varnish is very well designed, and we can use this feature to create our modern websites. I have one diagram presented by trends.buildwiz.com, and we can see trend with Varnish, and we can see that almost 14% of top 10,000 sites use Varnish because of Varnish is very, very powerful. Let's move on to the simplified example of how can we handle requests with Varnish. We open a web page, just hit some page, and request is received by Varnish. It can look in the cache, and in the case of cache miss, Varnish just asks the backend about the response for that page. If the page is cacheable, then Varnish just stores it without any additional information and can serve this information to the client. Pretty simple, yeah? On the next subsequent request, we have the same situation, but Varnish already has cached information and can serve this page without request to the backend. And we just boom and deliver the content to the client. Of course, it's a very simplified workflow how Varnish works, but Varnish has a lot of hidden power. Let's have a look at them more detailed. What is the key idea with Varnish is not to ask your backend as much as possible, because if you ask your backend, then you will receive a slow response, you will receive more load average on your backend. And let's try to understand how can we speed our Symfony application with Varnish technology. First of all, we need to read the IFC, because IFC is a source of very important information about cache control header, expires, attack, less modified. Without this knowledge, you won't be able to create a real powerful application and won't be able to serve many, many requests without caching. Next step is just to install Varnish. Of course, there are traditional ways. It's apt-get install for Debian or maybe for FreeBSD. Varnish is also available on Amazon Web Services, so you can use it if you have instances on AWS. And our next step is to configure the backend for Varnish. We need to point our Varnish instance to the concrete Symfony backend. For complex applications, there can be many different backends. We can use, for example, load balancer. We can switch between different backends or even make a failover. I think it's time for experiments. We are ready to the practical part of my talk, and I can show. Let me show you how can I use Varnish to speed up your application. We can start with a single page. It only contains 3 widgets, and this widget contains typical information, for example, about news, about different articles, or maybe it's interesting information. We pass only 2 variables, one of it is time and another block ID. Now let's have a look at our simple implementation of action and controller. You can see that we just do nothing here, actually only sleep for a specific amount of time and return a response. But in real application, there will be a real service call, maybe database query, or anything else that can take a lot of time. This is a screenshot of what we will see when we load our page. We can notice that each block is rendered after the previous one, so Varnish don't cache this information in our page, render it in one sequential way. We can notice that load time of that page will be almost 1 second. It's very, very big time, and we want to make it lower. Do you think that PHP is slow, or maybe our Symfony is slow? Yes, some of you can blame that, oh, PHP, oh, it's Symfony, can we handle more? But I think that developers are not to blame, because there are many good sites working on PHP and Symfony. And for example, in Alpari we have 1 million users, we have 1 million hits per day, and we have a Symfony, we have Varnish, and everything is okay. How can we make our site fast? First step is to make your response cacheable by marking your response with a special method called setShardMaxAge. And we can specify how much time can we store our response in the reverse cache proxy. And after that, Varnish will be able to serve this content and deliver it to the client. Pay attention to the additional information in our response. As you can see, our page loads only 1 millisecond, only 1. And we also can see a age header, 3 seconds, and cache control header. Everything looks good until the cache expires. Boom. 1 second again. Reason here is that when our information is expired in Varnish, we need to refresh it, and we need to make a request to our backend, and it will be 1 second again. And definitely it's not good. What can we do is to improve the situation. We have delays in the response time after each cache miss, and we need to render all 3 blocks at once. But what we want to make our page serving constantly for 1 millisecond for each request. I have a solution for that. We need to make our responses and requests asynchronous. Let's have a look. First of all, it's a VCL configuration, and we need to mark our response as grace. Grace is a special feature in Varnish that allows us to store our content more time that we mark. And we can use this feature later by checking if we have a grace version and we have TTL to serve that stale content, we just deliver it. And Varnish will use a special background thread to refresh that page when the user will see outdated stale version. And we also instruct Varnish to add a special header according to IFC called warning. And just to inform our users that we're serving stale content, we add a header called warning response is stale. Let's have a look at the difference now. As you can see, we receive a page that stored in Varnish for 9 seconds, but we can still serve them and time will be 1 millisecond. Perfect. So when our page is invalidated, we can serve stale content without asking the backend right now. It will be in background. And we have our mark. Good. But we still have some disadvantages because we still do not have an ability to control invalidation time for each of our widgets, and we cannot control how can we invalidate this page. Is it possible to optimize it in some way, or how can we make an update for each of our widgets? Technology is called EdgeSide Includes and require additional steps from our application, Symfony, in order to use it. To enable this feature in your Symfony application, just add special information called ASI and enable support for fragments that will be used by Symfony framework to control the rendering of your page. Next step will be to enable support in your Varnish for EdgeSide Includes. We need to mark our request with a special surrogate capability header, and this information will be used by our Symfony application in order to understand that we're working after reverse proxy, and this proxy supports such surrogate capability. And we also need to check if the backend supports this technology. Symfony will automatically reply with a special header, EdgeSide Include, and we can check this header in our Varnish instance. After that, we can process with our EdgeSide Includes. And the last step that we should take to, in order to use EdgeSide Includes is to replace our render function in Twig with special render ASI function. But please, please, please don't forget to add cache header to EdgeSide block, because in this case, your Varnish can easily DOS your own application. Remember this line. If we will look at our page with EdgeSide Include, without Varnish, we will notice that instead of real content, we have a special placeholder, and Varnish will use this placeholder to insert the content of that block. Big feature of Varnish that we can use such EdgeSide Includes for caching our content, and this solution is ideally suited for building complex page because each block has its own invalidation time. ESI also allow us to use less memory because each ESI block is stored separately and not with entire page. So that's an overview of possible ways how to use Varnish for caching. Of course, each of them has own advantages and disadvantages. but the SI model is definitely the key to success. Let's have a look on VCL tricks for better performance, because it's, I think, most interesting part of presentation, because Varnish is a hidden gem. Who likes cookies? But interesting fact that Varnish doesn't like cookies at all. If you have any cookie in your header from backend or from the client, Varnish won't cache anything. And it's a real problem, because if we cannot cache information with, for example, Google cookies or just with session cookie, then our performance will be low, because we will always miss our cache and Varnish won't cache anything. I want to give some tips how it's possible to make it cacheable. First tip is always remove any cookies from top-level requests. Top-level request is the entire page of your website. For example, it's when we first open the page, it will be a first request, and it's a top-level request. And we use this technique for our Alpori site, and each GET request in our application won't receive any cookies. It can be a problem, but we use it way of coding. And only EdgeSide Includes can receive information about cookie. Yes. We also have stateless EdgeSide Includes that do not receive cookies at all, and this information is used by Varnish to cache content. Let's have a look how can we implement this. First of all, we clear all possible cookies from our request, and what is more important, that we store our cookie to special xcookie header. It's some kind of trick, because Varnish will happily accept a request with xcookie header. Not with cookie, but with xcookie. Oh, it's okay. We will use this information later for our sub-request, EdgeSide Includes, for example. And we use this information to restore previous session cookie from our main request for EdgeSide Includes. And if this information is correct, we can also use caching for internal blocks or EdgeSide Includes block. On this slide, we can see a logic, how can we use caching for our internal blocks. By marking our content stateless, by using internal rows, we always unsend all possible cookies. And this means that Varnish will cache this block. And you can get more requests per second, because Varnish will use cached version. Even your application has an authorization. For example, you have a page with personalized information. For example, you have a block with information about user, but you want to cache the entire page. And second block is responsible to remove all cookies from top-level request. If our request is not internal, then kill these cookies. Trickiest feature to develop with Varnish is to allow caching of personalized ESI blocks. But be aware that it's very, very powerful feature, and it can be very dangerous to enable such caching, because if you cache information with authorization or set cookie, then another person can see this information. But if you understand how to enable this, you can always check cached version, even if you have any cookies. So if our request contain information about person. For example, our person already authorized it on our application. We can serve our page from the cache, and we can serve special cached EdgeSide Include blocks and receive an additional hit rate. But what you will receive if you will use such technique for organizing your application? Let's have a quick look. Here it's our traffic and our hit rate on Varnish at Alpari. And we have almost maybe 15 requests per second on our Varnish. And we have almost 11,000 requests per second on our Varnish. And we have 60% hit rate because of caching ESI blocks. But there is one small thing. That cache invalidation is one of the hardest things in computer science. In order to cache this content, we need somehow to invalidate it. And to invalidate your content, you need to define some restrictions. Who can invalidate your content? Who can refresh your page? You can define this by defining ACL for person or maybe services that will be able to purge your content. You can also enable special APIs or maybe network for developers or editors who can refresh. And now I want you to show you how can you use purging with Varnish, because it's, I think, very interesting topic. Varnish has special feature called ban lurker. Ban lurker is responsible to clear the content from the cache. And if you request a page and this page already in a ban, then Varnish will refresh it. But this list of bans can increase it. And in order to make it slower, in order to make it processable and removable from Varnish, you need to copy information from a response to special headers, because without that information, Varnish won't be able to remove stale bans. And now we will add a special routine to purge our content. We define here information and define a method called purge, and then just check if our page and our client IP in allowed list of developers who can purge. Then we just refresh that page. To refresh that page, we need to make a ban request. It's a special function in Varnish that allows us to exclude some old pages, some stale pages on each request. We can always use a feature called page refresh. It's a feature very useful for editors when they want just to refresh one of your single page by pressing Ctrl F5. And Varnish will mark this request as always miss. This information is very useful for Varnish developers and for someone who uses always this technology. Additionally, if you want to invalidate or work with Varnish more detailed, in more fine-grained way, you can also install Force HTTP Cache Bundle. It's a very powerful bundle with a lot of features like invalidation, like content creation. And I think this bundle has a lot of many interesting ways of solving complex problems. That's it. I think this information can help you to create a more powerful application and to use Varnish. So thank you for your attention. If you have any questions about Varnish, about how to configure it or how to use, feel free to ask me.